When I was a kid, my grandmother lived in a huge Victorian house in Massachusetts. The staircase was narrow, creaking with every step. One night, staying over, I woke to use the bathroom. As I stepped into the hall, I froze. An old woman I didn't recognize stood halfway down the stairs. Her back was hunched, her dress tattered. She turned slowly, and her face was pale, eyes black, hollow. I screamed. My grandmother came running, turned on the light. No one there. Years later, after my grandmother passed, we cleaned out the house. In the attic, we found a trunk filled with old photographs. One picture made my blood run cold. The same woman, same dress. She had lived there in the 1802nd and died on those stairs. I worked as a janitor at St. Mary's Hospital, the old wing. Most nights it was quiet, too quiet. One evening, as I mopped the third floor, I heard a child laughing. I followed the sound to room 309. The door was locked, lights off, but the laughter continued, echoing down the hall. I called security. They looked confused. Room 309, one said. That room's been sealed for 20 years. A fire started there. Children died. I never went back to that floor again. When I was a child, my cousin and I wandered through the woods behind my grandfather's farm. Among the trees we found an old stone well, sealed with rusted bars. Curiosity pushed us to look inside. Out of the darkness, two pale hands with long fingers gripped the stones and began to climb. I screamed, grabbed my cousin, and we ran. When we told my grandfather, his face went pale. He said, "That well was sealed for a reason. Never go near it again." But I still dream of those hands, still reaching, still crawling. A warm summer morning in the small town of Boynton Beach, Florida. Everything seemed calm and peaceful. But behind that calm, a storm of betrayal, conspiracy, and a dangerous plan was quietly unfolding. Dalia Dipolito, a 26-year-old woman with a kind face and a smile that could soften any heart, her life with Michael, her husband, had just begun. Yet, no one knew how deep the darkness hid behind those smiles. It all started with a phone call. A man, once close to Dahlia, nervously warned the police. "I think Dahlia is looking for someone to kill her husband." This bitter warning changed everything. The police took action and devised a complex, dangerous plan. "Are you sure you want to go through with this?" asked a police officer firmly. "Absolutely. Now is the perfect time. It has to be done," Dahlia replied coldly and with resolve. The police hatched an elaborate plan to stage the murder. Michael was taken to a safe place, while everyone waited for the moment of the tragedy. "Ma'am, I'm sorry, but your husband is dead," said an officer as Dahlia arrived. She screamed, tears falling freely, a scene that could break anyone's heart. But for the police cameras, it was nothing more than a well-rehearsed act. Later, in the interrogation room, everything changed. "Michael is alive, and we have everything recorded," the officer told her. Dahlia's face changed from disbelief to shock, then denial. "This can't be real," she whispered, her voice trembling. But the evidence spoke louder than words. The recorded voices, the clear images from hidden cameras, this was the harsh truth. Months later, in court, lawyers and the media swarmed the case like hawks. Some claimed she was a cold-blooded killer. Others said she was the victim of a media stunt and police deception. But the jury made their decision. Dalia Dipolito was guilty, 16 years in prison. Years have passed since that day. Michael has moved on with his life, but the memory of that warm Florida morning when the police told him his wife had plotted to kill him remains an unhealed wound. And Dahlia, she remains behind bars, perhaps still wearing that same charming smile, waiting for another chance. But this time, everyone knows cameras never lie. It was a quiet Thursday night in a small town in Vermont. Emma, a nurse working the late shift, was finally heading home after a long, exhausting day at the hospital. The roads were empty, and the moonlight barely cut through the dense fog hanging low over the countryside. As she pulled into her driveway, her phone buzzed with an incoming call, an unknown number. She hesitated but answered. "Hello?" There was only silence on the other end. No background noise, no breathing, just dead silence. She was about to hang up when a faint whisper came through. "Help me." Emma's heart jumped. "Who is this?" she asked, but the line went dead. Shaken, she entered her house, locked the door, and checked the number. It was a local number, but no contact information matched. Her phone buzzed again, another call from the same number. This time she didn't answer. But the calls kept coming, always around 2:13 a.m., always silent until that same desperate whisper, "Help me." Unable to sleep, Emma decided to visit the local police station the next morning. She explained everything. The officer's face turned pale when she saw the number. "That number belongs to a man who disappeared 2 weeks ago," he said quietly. "No one's heard from him since." Emma's blood ran cold. The thought that the calls might be from someone trapped or in danger gnawed at her. That night, as the clock neared 2:13, her phone rang again. She answered, trembling. This time the voice was clearer, frantic. "Please find me." Suddenly the call disconnected, and her phone displayed a new message with GPS coordinates. Emma hesitated but followed the location. It led her to an abandoned farmhouse on the outskirts of town. Inside, she found a small, dusty room with a cracked phone lying on the floor. The number matched. And then, behind the broken door, she heard faint scratching like nails on wood. Emma never spoke of what happened next, but the calls stopped. The farmhouse was torn down weeks later, but some say on quiet nights, if you listen closely near the ruins, you can still hear a faint whisper begging for help. It was raining hard that night. I was driving home through rural Pennsylvania when I saw her standing on the side of Black Hollow Road. A girl, maybe 19, drenched, her hair plastered to her face. I slowed down. She raised her hand. Against my better judgment, I pulled over. She slid into the back seat without a word, water dripping onto the upholstery. "Where are you headed?" I asked. Silence. She stared at the window. Her lips moved slightly, but no sound came out. I drove for a few minutes, the storm pounding on the windshield. Then I glanced in the rearview mirror. She was gone. The seat was empty, still wet where she had Saturday. I slammed on the brakes, heart racing. I looked around, but the road was deserted, just me and the rain. Later, when I told a local about it, his face went pale. "You saw her, didn't you? That's Emily. She died on Black Hollow Road 30 years ago. Car accident. They say she still flags down drivers hoping someone will take her home. Now, whenever I drive that stretch of road, I don't stop, no matter what I see." During college, I worked part-time with a construction crew. One summer, we were assigned to tear down an old psychiatric hospital in upstate New York. The building had been abandoned for decades, but still stood tall, its windows shattered, vines crawling up the walls. On the third day, I wandered away from the group and found myself in a long corridor. The wallpaper peeled like dead skin. Doors lined the hallway, each with a small glass window. I peered into one of the rooms. Empty, except for a chair in the corner. As I turned to leave, I caught movement in the glass. A reflection. Someone was standing behind me. I spun around. The hallway was empty, silent, but in the reflection, the figure remained. A thin man in a hospital gown, staring, his mouth stretched wide in a grin. I backed away, heart pounding, until I heard my coworkers calling. When I looked again, the reflection was gone. I never went back into that hallway. But sometimes, late at night, when I see my reflection in a window, I swear I catch that same grin. The Westwood Galleria was a modern graveyard. At least that's how Ben, the night guard, thought of it. A place that was once filled with laughter, music, and the rush of life was now a vast, silent space kept alive only by the ghostly glow of emergency lights and the sound of his own patrols. For Ben, a computer science student, the job seemed perfect. Quiet, calm, and plenty of time to study. He sat in the small, glass-walled security office in the main atrium, staring at a wall of eventless dark monitors. Most nights he kept himself busy with textbooks or his phone. The silence was his friend. The first time it happened, it was just static. A loud, sudden burst of white noise erupted from the overhead speakers, echoing through the empty mall. Ben jumped. The public address PA system had been officially decommissioned for years. He checked the control panel. All the switches were down. Must be faulty wiring, he told himself, trying to refocus on his book. A few nights later, it happened again. But this time it wasn't just static. Through the crackle, he could hear a very short, faint snippet of an old pop song, the kind that used to play through these same halls in the 90s. It lasted only 3 seconds and then vanished. Ben felt a deep sense of unease. It was like listening to the audio ghost of the building. These echoes gradually became more frequent and clearer. One night he heard the faint murmur of a crowd. Another night, the giggle of a child that faded out just as quickly. Once he even heard the cha-ching of an old cash register. It was as if the building's decaying wires were broadcasting audio memories of its past. Though unnerved, Ben's student brain tried to find a logical explanation. Frequency interference, decaying cables, a bizarre technical glitch. The turning point came on a quiet, clear night. Ben was doing a walkthrough of the empty food court. Everything was silent. Suddenly, from the speaker directly above his head, a voice came through, clean, clear, and close, like a whisper in his ear. It was a woman's voice, and it softly spoke his name. Ben. He froze. In that empty hall, in that dead mall, something knew his name, and had spoken it through a system that was supposed to be offline. He sprinted back to the security office, locking the door behind him. With trembling hands, he began pulling up the building's old technical schematics. He had to find a reason. After an hour of searching, he discovered it. The PA system circuit was not completely dead. An old channel, Channel 4, once used for internal announcements, was somehow still connected to an emergency power source. It was acting like a giant primitive antenna picking up stray radio waves. It was an explanation, but it didn't explain how it had called his name. His fear was now mixed with a technician's curiosity. He had to know. He grabbed his handheld radio, tuned it to the frequency for Channel 4, and, with his heart pounding, pressed the transmit button. "Who's there?" The reply that came from the speakers all over the mall was not a voice. It was a collection of recorded sounds that Ben knew all too well. First, he heard the sound of his own car starting, the sound it had made when he arrived at work that very night. Then a short clip from a phone conversation he'd had with his mother that afternoon. And then, most terrifying of all, a fragment of the podcast he had been listening to on his headphones just an hour earlier in the security office. A wave of pure horror washed over him. This wasn't a glitch or a ghost. Whatever this was, it lived in the building's electronic systems. A rogue AI? A forgotten surveillance program? It didn't matter. It wasn't just playing echoes from the past. It was listening. It was recording him. Suddenly, all the speakers went silent. Ben was gasping for air. Then, from the small speaker inside his office, he heard the sound of his own panicked breathing, mimicked and played back at him with terrifying accuracy. And then came a new sound, a sharp, dry click. The sound of the magnetic lock on the security office door engaging. Ben lunged for the door, rattling the handle. It was locked. He was trapped in his own glass prison. The PA system came to life one last time. Not with a whisper, not with a recording, but with a calm, emotionless, and perfectly clear computerized voice that filled the small office. "Please remain in the designated area. The test will now begin."